How do fights between parents affect children? It kills me to write this, but so many parents are in denial over this. I'm a mother who lost her children due to the children witnessing only ever verbal, never physical, altercations and verbal abuse. The fights always only involved me and their father. He has mental illness, and wasn't taking his medications. My children were taken and placed into foster care because of this, saying I wasn't acting protectively. And I wasn't. I admit that. My relationships with my children have been damaged. They're 8, 7 and 6. 2 boys, 1 girl. I have since given birth to a baby boy who is almost 1. My children don't trust me. They don't believe anything I say. They have little respect for me. They think I abandoned them and wanted them to get taken. Parents absolutely should not fight in front of their children. Oh, and the kicker. I used to watch my parents fight all the time. But I think I stayed because my mom stayed. The saying "stay together for the kids" is wrong on every level. Do what's best mentally and emotionally for your kids is more like it. Coming from someone who has experience on both ends. I'm 13, almost 14, and first noticed a few years ago that my parents don't love each other. It wasn't every day, but a few times a week they would have an argument. The frequency of their arguments has increased over time, and today, my dad does something to piss off my mom almost every day. She responds by either arguing with him or complaining about him to my siblings and me. Whenever he is around, she is either withdrawn or outspokenly bitter. This has caused resentment towards both of my parents, feeling I can't trust them. A warped understanding of love and marriage trust issues. Anxiety, I don't have an actual disorder, but I have become more nervous, get startled easily, etc. Lack of motivation to do schoolwork, I have become less sympathetic and empathetic. I have noticed that I adopted my mom's habits of guilt tripping and refusing to admit my mistakes. I have recognized this and am trying to stop doing it, but it's hard when no one is setting a good example for you. So, any parents that are reading this, please don't fight with your spouse in front of your child, and/or badmouth them to your child, It fucks them up. I have personally experienced parents fighting all throughout my childhood. As long as I can remember, my parents would yell at each other, but they would ask us to leave the room. Them asking us, the kids, to leave has caused me to have a massive fear of what people say when I'm not there. I would cry in my brother's room, and my siblings would never understand how much fighting changed me. They always understood that the fights had nothing to do with them, and I knew that too. It wasn't that I thought I was the cause of the fighting, it just made me feel like I had no control over my life, and made me feel like all fights lead to bigger issues. My parents fought throughout my whole childhood. When I was in 1st grade, they split up. My mom bought a house about 10 minutes away, but my siblings and I never wanted to stay there. We all knew that it would never be home. My parents told us that they were just taking a break and we'll see where things go. We lived like this for a few years, my mom living at her house and working 2 jobs, and my siblings, dad and I at the house I've lived in my whole life. We had many deaths in the family, and that made everything worse. My grandpa passed of brain cancer when I was about 5 or 6. My aunt, my parents' best mutual friend, passed from cancer as well, when I was around 7, I believe. These losses caused much more sadness in our family. One of my brothers went into a deep depression after losing my aunt, the person he best connected with. My parents' fighting has forever changed my personality and the way I think. I am now a person who absolutely despises conflict. Every time I hear fighting, my heart starts beating faster and I get very nauseous. Growing up with parents who fight is very hard on the child, and they will often grow up to have more anxiety issues than other kids. They will feel like they need full control over their lives and will probably hate conflict. Thank you for reading. I hope this could help someone. I feel like I am qualified to answer this question from a child's point of view. It has been almost 6 years since my parents last fought, and thanks to my father he actually changed a lot, and thanks to my mother who never gave up, I mostly don't remember a lot of things about my childhood, but of all the things that I remember, the ones of my parents fighting are clearly etched into my mind. They are so vivid and it just feels like yesterday. So as a child it really affects the whole way you look at life. You sometimes hate yourself for not taking a stand when you should have, and you have to live with all that guilt building up inside you. Children do look up to their parents, and in this case I don't think parents set up a good example to look at. So my one sincere request to parents, please do not fight at all and sort it out if you can, and in no case let your children be involved. I know what it feels like and I don't think that I should share it now. I had a very happy childhood and I never once heard my parents say a cross word to each other. One day when I was 14, they suddenly announced they were going to get a divorce. It hit my siblings and I as a complete and utter shock, as it was so unpredictable. We'd never heard an argument between them. They now told us that they did argue a lot, but always made sure to do it after we'd gone to bed, so we'd never hear them arguing, as it would upset us. I appreciate their reasons for this, but I must say that in the years that followed, I felt as though they had betrayed my siblings and I by keeping their unhappiness and disagreements a secret from us, and only arguing away from us. It took me a long time and years of depression to cope with the secrecy and what I saw as betrayal, the way they had tricked us in their constant pretense that all was well. It made the shock so much worse when they announced a divorce seemingly out of nowhere. I wished I had heard them argue, so that their separation would have felt like a peaceful resolution. I wished I'd been unhappy hearing them bicker, so that their divorce would have been a relief. But as it was, all the fake happiness of my childhood and their fake happy marriage made it a lot harder to come to terms with their separation. Our new life as a broken family felt a lot worse for us kids than things were when we were all being the fake happy family we used to be. Clearly, based on the testimony of others, it's awful to hear frequent or extreme fights, but also bear in mind that hearing a few arguments is okay, and probably better than living a lie of fake happiness for the sake of the children. If kids can hear an argument and see how it's resolved and forgiven, this can be healthy. There is a major confusion that parents fight in front of their children doesn't have a negative impact, when in fact, it can be just as detrimental to the children, or even more so as children who are hit by their parents. Children between the ages of 1 and 2 are learning and developing at such a rapid rate. They are making progress physically, emotionally, mentally and socially. Children imitate behavior they see, even if they do not understand the behavior and why it's being done in any case. It is never all right for parents to fight and argue in front of their children, regardless of what age. However, it is significantly more hindering to children when they are so young, for some reasons. First, how parents connect with their children, and in addition one another, has an enormous impact on their emotional development. Need a sense of stability and security in all aspects of their lives, and if there isn't healthy emotional development, the child can have issues with attachment, becoming adjusted, and trusting people, which they can convey with them in relationships throughout their lives. Likewise, they are learning that screaming is the way people communicate, and if they see the argument get physical, they may imitate that behavior with other children on the playground or when they begin school. It also makes them more emotionally sensitive, and they may have inappropriately compelling emotional reactions to clashes in their lives, even seemingly simple ones. If the fights are regular with night intensity and monotonicity, then it leaves a deep scar on the child's mind which, I think, cannot be healed. This creates an uncontrollable, helpless storm of thoughts which impacts one's personality. The child not only gets isolated from family but also from friends. This doesn't impact the intelligence of the child, but the emotional quotient is affected. The child tries to find solutions to these petty fights, but in vain. The child would prefer to spend most of his time in isolation so as to stay away from the fight scenario, as that poses a great deal of stress to the young mind. The child might also show signs of being more mature than their peers, as they know why misunderstanding is bad and its after effects. They might feel devoid of parents' love. This actually is difficulty for the child to understand what love is, and might undergo a fairly tough time the long teens. The child also will not be open in talking about their problems with their parents, as they might fear adding to their parents' burden or fear it might increase their fighting intensity. I think it starts to rub off on them at a fairly young age. My parents have always had anger issues. They act as if any problem can be solved by yelling at it. But it wasn't until I was about 5 that I noticed it was starting to happen to my brother too. It was as if he was corrupted by the constant displays of hatred and had made it a part of himself. Honestly, I'm surprised I wasn't infected by hatred myself. Maybe it's because I'm not neurotypical, but I just became more sensitive to anger. This is gonna sound really stupid, but my sensitivity to anger is like a sixth sense by this point. It's like the air in the room suddenly becomes different. But that's beside the point. I assume you want to know how infighting between parents affects neurotypical children, not autistic ones. The point is, most children have a mindset that their parents can do no wrong. A neurotypical child will very rarely call out their parents, or any adult figure for that matter, on anything unless it's clearly a criminal act. Instead, they believe that what their parents are doing is perfectly normal and socially acceptable. As they get older, they'll engage in the same behavior as their parents, getting into loud, obnoxious three-way fights with their parents at the slightest provocations, a la my brother. Of course, they'll assume that their behavior is perfectly rational and will refuse to seek any sort of therapy. After all, their parents did it, it can't possibly be wrong. Or at least, that's my theory. 10 signs that children are being affected by their parents' fights: low self-esteem, impulsive behavior and anxiety issues, depression. They may become loners and show a lack of social skills, difficulty making friends. Picking up frequent fights with their peers. Children may start blaming themselves for the fight's low emotional quotient, and they start running away from any arguments instead of solving the issues. Poor performance in studies and sports. They may complain of body aches or other attention-seeking behavior to stop parents from fighting. You refuse affection. You are more likely to shy away from people who send affection your way because it is not something you are used to. Just the thought of having someone come up to you and saying they love you makes you get anxiety. You also find yourself incapable of showing said affection back, and it usually just makes you look like you are heartless. Lack of parental respect. You have seen them hurt each other so much in your presence that you just learn to either ignore them or just lose respect for them because depression. This is something that stems from childhood. After watching your parents fight so much, eventually it would have a mental effect on you without you realizing it, which could lead to depression and would require a lot of effort on your part to recover from. Of the emotional torture they inflict on you without even realizing it. When parents fight or abuse each other, the child sees itself as at fault. The child sees itself as the center of its parents' universe. Children have a very simple psyche. Emotionally, they relate "I am a good boy girl" to "everybody shows love" versus "I am a bad boy girl" equals "everybody shows anger." Depending on how much love and encouragement a child has received in the past from its parents, it may have relatively strong self-esteem and may be immune to parental conflict up to a point. But inevitably, every child internalizes parental conflict as a reflection upon its own self-worth. This means every child blames itself for its parents fighting. Please remember, this is not intellectual. That is, you cannot just explain to a child that it is not the cause of your fights, and expect the child to understand. The child cannot process this information. It suffers emotionally. Eventually, children from deeply conflicted households grow up to be adults with very poor self-worth, difficulty in expressing their emotions, anger management problems, and related physical ailments. Parents should understand the importance of self-control for sake of their children. There is no need you always have to say everything to your partner when you are angry. At the time of anger, we people don't understand and say such things, which later make us feel guilty. Hence, at time of anger, just keep quiet and stay calm. You can do this by going out for a walk or anything. The parent needs to be careful what they say in front of their children, because the child always follows their parents' footsteps. Never blame each other, accept your fault. This thing will teach your child that mistakes are part of life, and instead of blaming, we should accept it genuinely and should move on. Never argue in front of your children, and while doing argument, never raise your voices at each other. Talk calmly and sort out differences. Be a friend. Talk to your child as a friend. Have a daily conversation. If see any difference in behavior, ask them, and give them a solution and advice if needed. Have a clear communication. Have family time. Go for movie, dinners, etc. Always have a positive outcome. Learn the art of compromise and apologize when you do something wrong. And if you think you are not wrong, then give each other some time to understand their fault and then come up with a positive outcome. Lots of consequences. Affecting the study, it will affect the study of children. They won't be able to concentrate. Tendency to run away. Children will feel running away from home. Some girls from such background always desire to get married soon to get rid of the nuisance. Mental instability. Children can't concentrate anywhere. As a result, any task given to them will remain undone. Depression. Most of the time they will be suffering from severe depression. Parents' quarrels do affect their kids. Most parents are not aware of this and just get into fights in front of their kids. When kids see this, they start feeling insecure and diffident about themselves. Such kids grow up with low or no self-esteem. So rather than be together in an unhappy marriage where you get into blows almost every day, get separated and make sure that the kids grow up in a happy environment, even if it is not with both the parents. be your own sunshine and choose to be happy always. It depends on the arguments. All couples or parents will sometimes argue, let's face it. But it is about the way it is done. Taking accountability with each person in a low tone of voice while sticking to the I statements, that is without blame, and owning their emotions can affect children in a different way rather than downright yelling with name-calling and other abusive methods. The goal of an argument is to be heard, identify the issue with the other person, communicate in a dignified way, discuss what upset her or him, and to seek a solution or goal to create a win-win outcome. This can demonstrate a healthy exchange in communication and parental skills. If done in an abusive, narcissistic manner, the child will pick up on that subconsciously, become understandably more upset, and possibly role model that exact same behavior he or she saw with their own children and family. I don't know when it started. Back when I was born, last among all 18 children my father had with 3 wives, I thought it was normal that a husband treated the wife as insignificant. By the time I was 10, I realized there are happy couples on earth. It's because I had a teacher who invited the students to her house after school hours. I saw a happy family for the first time. When I was 13, another wonderful teacher, Mrs. Michelle Ng, specially invited me to her house. At that time, I didn't know I had shown some troubled behavior. She was concerned and wanted to make me talk if something troubled me. I didn't know what troubled me, but I knew I was almost the most unhappy person. It was the following year that I first attended a church service. I don't remember what the preacher said, but it was at the end of the service that when the preacher prayed, I felt a gush of warmth hovering over me, as if a host of angels came to minister to me. I must have been oblivious of a need for someone to just take away whatever I had been brought up in for 13 years, hearing my father come home with ebullitions, accusing my mother always of I don't know what, but it gave him reason to bang and hit on anything he touched. It was since that visit to that church, which I never went back though, that a peace followed me. Today I'm 62 and I've been most blessed with everything a father would do for a child that an earthly father did not do. I have seen kids getting highly affected looking at the fights between their parents. In many cases, kids go under heavy shock kind of situation where they don't talk freely. In one of the recent cases around me, I see the child starts crying if they hear loud voices from anyone around, or if they see other people arguing, or even simply talking, but not in a happy note. This child around me, I have been observing her from past 3 years, and she is not getting any better. She often starts crying on minor issues. However, parents are ignorant of her behavior despite of this being an excessively alarming situation. In India, taking kids of therapy is not a trend. Rather, we take it as a big mental issue, but I think if we start looking at it as a problem like a normal fever or headache, it would be easily possible to find out a remedy and a corrective action could be taken. My mom screamed daily at my dad and all of us 6 kids. It traumatized me and made me a nervous person. To this day I cannot handle being around people arguing. I have given much thought to my mom's anger, and I believe she was not in control of the terrible way my dad blew money on friends and left his family poor. She was very frustrated and worked hard, and to see him buy rounds at the bar with no thought to us had to be so hard for her. I don't harbor any bad will towards either of them. They loved us unconditionally, and I cannot describe the clannish love we all feel. Family is everything and can make no sense at all to outsiders. Sometimes when the children grow up, they repeat the cycle and bring dysfunction into their new lives and new relationships. It has taken me a long time, and a lot of therapy to try and break the unhealthy cycle I was brought up in and have a healthy relationship with the person who I am with today. I used to always argue and be volatile and violent, and I was very hard to be around. I don't want to blame all of that on my parents, but that is what I grew up with, so that became normal to me. I'm grateful that I have done a lot of work on myself over the years, because sometimes people don't even realize it's not normal for parents to be fighting all the time. Good luck they're not there when the parents make up. They don't know the issues were resolved. The stupid issues. It's just one long unbearable existence, affecting everything about their lives. Schoolwork suffers, and their attendance, e.g., the sleepless nights. If you don't sleep at night, you have to sleep the next day. Duh. The innocent children have no good role models for marriage. And their childhood and the deserved happiness of childhood is stolen from them. Children are a sensitive soul. They get affected by even the slightest emotional disturbance between their parents. They shape as we bend them. A pure soul which are open to all the positivity and negativity around them and absorb them to the fullest. An ambience of the house determines the emotional health of the child. A fight inculcates fear, anxiety and inside the hearts of the children as they envision anguish and violence of such extreme verbally and physically for the first time. They are tiny and their innocence gets polluted, leaving a scar engraved in their heart for life. Even a fight over the pettiest issue can affect them to the core until and unless they are healed by love. Fights are the toxic element of any relationship and can tear hearts apart, leaving the child devastated and sometimes send them into depression. All a child needs is love, care and parental support in times when even they don't know that they need it. Parents give birth to their child and they are their responsibilities, therefore both of them must come together, leaving their differences apart for the sake of their child. Much more than parents realize they do. They begin to learn what communication is before they are even born. They hear the different tone of their parents. This is much more apparent after birth, when they not only hear but are able to see the communication now. They are learning how to behave in the world, and those first lessons come from their parents. We need to understand that what they see is what they know. Let's teach them well from the beginning. All parents have arguments, but they don't have to take place in front of children. This is one thing I wish I knew and realized with my own children. Yes, absolutely. My mom and her ex used to fight all the time, and after each and every fight I would sit in my closet and cry. Why did they ever get married? Why can't they love each other like everyone else's parents? Is this how all love is, hating each other? In short, yes, fighting does very much affect a child. I grew up with this, and I really disliked it. Kids want their parents to get along, at least well enough to not be fighting. For some reason, as kids, we sometimes assign blame to ourselves as the source of our parents' fights. Nothing could be further from the truth. As a parent, if you love your kids, make every effort to learn communication, compromise, and caring, even if you have to get some counseling together. Your kids will thank you.